This week on the agenda, the DeepSeek shock. How did artificial intelligence become the new flashpoint in global geopolitics? At the end of last year, DeepSeek was a little-known Chinese artificial intelligence startup. But by the end of last month, it was the most talked-about company in the world, whose revolutionary approach to open-source generative AI had rocked global markets, wiping more than $1 trillion off tech and energy stocks, and seemingly levelling the global AI playing field. But what do the shockwaves caused by DeepSeek mean for the future of AI, and indeed, the future of global geopolitics? Joining me now are Toby Walsh, Laureate Fellow and Scientia Professor of Artificial Intelligence at the Department of Computer Science and Engineering at the University of New South Wales, and geopolitical strategist and tech advisor from Hong Kong University, Dr. Brian Wong. Great to have you both on the agenda. Toby, let me start with you. Why is everybody talking about DeepSeek, and how did AI become such a global talking point?
Well, they definitely put a cat amongst the pigeons, releasing a model that was as good as the best of the West, demonstrating quite convincingly that China was not behind in the air race, but was really neck and neck with the very best US tech companies. And then I think, also what's pretty impressive was that they did it with far less resources. We've seen the players in the US throw hundreds of millions of dollars at building AI models, and supposedly DeepSeek did it for just $5 or $6 million, which is pretty impressive, and also demonstrates that it's not just people who have the deepest pockets necessarily who are going to win this race.
Brian, what do you think DeepSeek says then about China's role in the future of technology and in the AI race?
Call me an idealist, but I firmly believe that the future of technology is one where everyone, each and every citizen, company, and also country, regardless of how large or how small, deserves to have a say. And I think ultimately what this all comes down to is choices. Whichever and whatever options can maximize the range of choices and agency on a part of small and medium actors, I think we should welcome the changes and the transformations that come our ways in accordance with that principle. And that is why the rise of China on first principles level provides more choices for everyone, whether it be in terms of folks who can't afford the incredibly restrictive, actually, and prohibitive sort of technological barriers or thresholds that need to be crossed in the case of closed source engineering and operations, CF OpenAI, or can't afford the somewhat expensive and still unaffordable models and the services that they have to pay for in order to access, so to speak. I think the open source nature of DeepSeek really shattered the old paradigm of closed-sourced, monopolized, oligopoly-driven innovation, so to speak. And secondly, and very quickly, the successes of DeepSeek should in fact be attributed to a hybridization and also a mixing and matching of American methods, the Silicon Valley culture, the Chinese sort of entrepreneurial grit, and also the innovation and talents of the homegrown engineers in China. So I wouldn't attribute its success to just the Chinese model or the Chinese way. I actually think that the successes of many Silicon Valley startups over the past few decades has really contributed towards the innovation in management and also organizational and hierarchical or hierarchy organization methods adopted by Liang Wenfang and also the other co-founders of DeepSeek that he has. So in short, I'd say that it's a cultural exchange and bricolage has contributed towards DeepSeek's success, and long may this continue into the future.
The rise of DeepSeek has also ignited more discussion around semiconductor chips, hasn't it, Toby? Especially those of NVIDIA. Those shares dropped more in a day than any company ever after the DeepSeek reveal. So where exactly are we in terms of these so-called chip wars?
Well, it does throw into question the trade restrictions that the US have put in. They try to limit the export of the very top-end GPU chips that NVIDIA provide, the shovels that are powering this AI revolution. And the fact that DeepSeek were able to do it with a smaller number of GPUs, some of them, many of them, an older generation model, it does throw into doubt the US strategy to try and, limit the access to these tools. But a bigger question is really the future of NVIDIA. NVIDIA, before that stock market fall, was the most valuable company in the world. They're now only the third most valuable company in the world. I was never sure that just selling the shovels was really justified such a $3 trillion valuation for NVIDIA, and that we weren't going to find, other ways to build this tech. And indeed, we seem to be finding other cheaper ways to be building this tech. So it might be bad news if your pension fund happens to own NVIDIA stocks. But actually, I think, to amplify point of discussion earlier, which is that it's good news for the rest of the planet that this technology is going to be more widely available. It's not going to be something that one or two players are going to keep their hands on.
So, Brian, do you think it's a bit of a wake-up call, perhaps, for global financial markets? Is it a question of saying, look, tariffs can't stifle creativity, innovation's always going to find a way?
I think what you're referring to there really is export controls and export bans, which obviously the US via the Chip and Science Act and also a raft of subsequent follow-up actions and measures have sought to really drive through as a core prong of almost bipartisan consensus that there's an imperative to inhibit China's rise technologically as an emerging power. And my response to this is twofold. Firstly, innovation always does find a way, because ultimately necessity is the mother of innovation. And it is fair to say that when the CHIP Act was rolled out, there was this overarching sense of doom and gloom amongst many watching and observing Chinese tech. I remember some China watchers declaring, perhaps somewhat jubilantly, that Chinese tech is over, that Chinese tech has been crippled. There's no way of going back or recovering from this. And yet only 2 years and a bit onwards, we're now seeing the emergence of DeepSeek, which basically, in many ways, leapfrogged, right, by circumventing a lot of the long-standing steps required in AI development, whether it be through distillation or other innovation with regards to algorithmic efficiency. What DeepSeek has done is to say, even if we don't have access to the same level and quantity of super advanced chips, we can still work on the other aspects of chip efficacy and utility, such as the efficiency of the algorithms of models, alternatively performing partially unhobbling, transforming the way functionalities work in order to ensure that they can basically bolster and improve the models qualitatively, seismically, without leaning too much into raw compute and also chip length. Now, that's something that I think these export controls could not have, or were not really able to accommodate or account for when they were introduced, so to speak, these measures. Yeah. And yet concurrently, there are costs, there are obvious costs that are borne by not just China, but also many third-party nations who must be subjected to the long-arm jurisdictional policing by the US, who's basically saying, look, you're either with us or you're with them. You've got to choose. You can't sort of straddle the two, you can't sit on the fence. And yet I would say in response to that, why can't small and medium states choose? What gives us the right as larger powers to say you must side with us or with others? That, to me, strikes me as a rather haughty act of supercilious and imperialist condescension. So I would say the costs are borne, and yet these costs are not so fundamentally stifling, such that innovation is not possible, as evidenced by recent events.
Toby, what does this all say about the dynamics between the US and China when it comes to AI competition? We have Donald Trump back in the White House, all that talk of tariffs. Where does AI fit into that picture?
Oh, well, it's AI is going to be a key component in the driving forwards the US economy, the Chinese economy, and the world's economy. So it's going to be a significant part of it. And the important thing to understand here is that this isn't just about the US-China dynamic. Of course, it impacts very directly the US-China dynamic, but it really does open out the AI race to all different players. It's a bit like running the 4-minute mile. When Roger Bannister first ran the 4-minute mile, and we knew it was physically possible, lots of people were then able to do it. So lots of people are now going to be able to build these sorts of state-of-the-art models. We know, quite well the tech that went into DeepSeek's model, and the fact that you can do it now tells a lot of people. So I'm expecting lots of people in lots of different places, and those places might not be just the US and China, to now be able to build models of similar performance for similar and indeed even cheaper prices. So I think it really opens out the opportunity for everyone to participate and benefit from the AI revolution.
Would you agree with that, Brian? Would you say that AI is maybe the new battleground of geopolitics, or it's a healthy competition?
Well, I firmly believe that AI can be indeed a field for healthy and constructive competition that lifts all boats up at once. But I also recognize, because I'm not Pollyannish, that there's a potential for it to go haywire. And that is to say, on the first point, AI could be an incredibly effective force in maintaining and supporting world peace, whether it be in improving the precision and accuracy of modeling in military predictions and forecasting, or in supporting and streamlining cross-cultural communication and cross-linguistic translation to reduce misunderstandings in the world at large, or even just in closing gaps of efficiency and also governance so that you can have a more equitable global development paradigm. These are not castles in the sky. These are concrete usages of AI in public policy that I myself have spoken on in Cambodia, in Indonesia, and also in Greece. And yet, on the other hand, there's indeed a risk that AI becomes this conduit and also in many ways, a manifestation of the worst tendencies in this so-called strategic rivalry narrative, this meta-narrative that's dominating the airwaves right now, whether it be Beijing or Washington seeing one another as this nemesis to beat, to defeat, to race in this unwinnable race towards artificial general intelligence or artificial super intelligence. It's quite perilous. And yet this narrative goes on because there are folks with vested interests on both sides who want to securitize AI and turn it into basically a tool for nationalistic chest thumping. And that is something that I fear, because once acceleration becomes the norm, and once all brakes are thrown out of the window in name of so-called national security and triumphalism against the other side, that is when we really have to grapple with, as the people, as ordinary folks on the ground, grapple with the cost and fallout from AI non-alignment with human beings, whether it be in terms of instrumental convergence or just, the idea of AI engaging in extensive hallucination, deception, manipulation, because we haven't figured out how to rein in agentic AI, and all we're focused on instead is how to get there first. And that, to me, is a real danger that we have to look at right now as sane observers on the ground, and from the sidelines too.
I think that we should be mindful that there is also a distinct possibility that we repeat what happened with the internet. I mean, essentially, we've ended up now with two internets. There's the Chinese version of the internet with the various Chinese providers of internet services, and then there's the Western internet with the largely US providers of those very similar services. And I'm somewhat concerned that we might end up in a very similar place with AI, that there will be the Western offerings and there will be the Chinese offerings, and there will be, there will be very little between them. And that's definitely a possible future if we're not careful.
The risk of that, of course, just to add on to what Toby said, is that when you trained LLMs with data taken from these two separate spheres, so to speak, and the preferences and biases of individuals that are then fed into the LLMs and also agents, right, of AI, that you might end up with agents with clashing preferences and viewpoints and deeply suspicious judgments of the other, and that in turn is not conducive when it comes to their application and usage in military or even other non-military civilian usages where approximations of the other side's intents are necessary. In simple layperson's terms, when there's no communication, no interaction, and total siloing and bifurcation, well, you could only imagine, what that does to human beings. Now, imagine doing that to AIs, which may be thinking and processing and materializing and manifesting at a rate that is 100 times of that of human beings. That is a real danger that is sort of increasingly bipolar digital world order, as Toby portrayed, could be leading us towards.
Well, certainly the rise of DeepSeek has certainly opened up conversations talking about not just the opportunities, but the risks and the security and the potential dangers. But Toby, I wonder if you think there are any more or further DeepSeek shocks in the pipeline, and if so, where might they come from, and what might they mean for the state of global geopolitics?
Well, I think the other important thing, we haven't really talked much about it, but the other innovation, the unsettling aspect of DeepSeek was the fact that it's open source. And open source has been, a force for immense good. The internet runs on open source software, and it's much secure, much safer because of that, because of the thousands of eyeballs that look at the code, that are constantly updating it. So it's a very effective, very good way to build robust software. On the other hand, and we don't have a scientific resolution to this problem, making the code open source puts it in the hands of potentially bad actors. And we haven't worked out how to square that circle. How do we get the benefits, the security, the scaling benefits that you get by open sourcing thing that's been so wonderful to scale the internet, to make the internet as robust as it is, without also giving the technology to people who are going to do harm with it.
So, Brian, what do you think that the long-lasting impact and effect of DeepSeek will be? Where is the sector heading?
I think the sector is going to head towards and trend towards more open source models and a proliferation, really, of models that are trained in a manner that, as Toby highlighted, comes with significant risks and downsides, as well as positives, which I've long believed in, right? The emancipation and democratization of AI, the empowering of the Davids in this race or this battle against the Goliaths of big tech corporations, and also having citizens be active gatekeepers in the progress of AI development. But on the flip side to that, right, unlike nuclear weapons and unlike other weapons of mass destruction, so to speak, AI is distinctly more dual use in kind. You can't say, here's, positive, good AI that you can allow for folks to use. Here's a bad AI we have to gatekeep. You can't say that because that is impossible to begin with. And furthermore, the barriers to access and entry would only become precipitously lower, which means that ultimately what we're going to see here is that insurgency groups, rebels, large corporations, unregulated actors could also have access to sufficiently potent AI to engage in and wage mass disinformation warfare, astroturfing campaigns, electoral interference, manipulation, and operations. To stay ahead of that, we need trusted and also accountable stakeholders who can say, well, here's how we're going to use AI responsibly in a manner that caters to public interests. And yet, who are these stakeholders who are so responsible? Who are these stakeholders that we can place as average and ordinary citizens our trust into? I think that's a question that really needs to be answered by both governmental and also private sector players alike, because the people deserve better than blank checks and also regulations that stifle innovation on one hand, but also the people deserve better than a laissez-faire, no brakes applied, and fundamentally anything goes wild, wild west when it comes to the safety and also the regulation of AI's application and usage.
The other important consequence of DeepSeek is that if you thought that the AI race today was running at a terrifying speed, it's only going to get faster because now it's that much cheaper. So it was previously you were limited by how quickly you could scale, and how deep your pockets were and how fast the technology was evolving. Well, now that we know that you can do it with much less compute and much quicker, therefore I suspect we're going to be even more stunned by the rate of change.
Toby Walsh, Brian Wong, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Still to come here on the agenda, AI in the global south. We'll assess what DeepSeek's model means for the world's developing nations.
We are all connected. Across borders, across continents, connected by ideas, a shared humanity. Stay connected.
Welcome back to the agenda. As we've heard, DeepSeek's AI breakthrough is already making a difference to the conversation between the world's largest economies, China, the US, the EU. But what about the world's developing nations? How much of a game changer can DeepSeek be for them? Joining me now is Michael Michie, co-founder of Kenyan company EverseTech. Michael, thanks for coming on the programme. Now, you've called DeepSeek a catalyst for transformation. What exactly did you mean by that?
DeepSeek, I call it a catalyst because primarily, one, it's open sourced, and the fact that it's reasoning model is fully transparent. Ideally, with open source models that you can easily build upon, makes it easier, especially for the global south, to just pick the model and start building layers on top of it for various applications and use cases. So because it's now open sourced, it's sort of the hard part's been done for us, and now we have an opportunity to have a very powerful model according to the benchmarks that we can use for a lot of use cases here in Africa.
So if DeepSeek's success means that the technology is more accessible, or more accessible than we thought it was, what does it mean for startups? And what does it mean then also for big tech?
I think for big tech, there's, the change for them is that the moat is no longer considered having your model as a private model. The moat is how you innovate around it. So aside from what DeepSeek have done by having everything as open source, their training method and their use of the mixture of experts system has essentially created better outputs in terms of cost of inferencing, which is quite remarkable. So they've now created that. So innovation is becoming more of the moat to survive on. And I think now the model is just going to be less of a moat to have. And I think big tech would adapt to that. And given the fact that still all this training does need a lot of compute and energy, I think they'd stay the course of their plans. For the most part, they may need to maybe find better ways to improve inferencing on a cost perspective through their engineering, and also trying to make things a lot faster. For startups, I think it's an amazing thing. We've already started playing with DeepSeek in terms of just seeing how we can take some of the smaller models that we have and try to use them, just replace our pre-existing models that we've been using to see just how well we can leverage what DeepSeek is able to do. And aside from just catalyzing, it's also given us an opportunity to look at different use cases that we thought were not possible or were too expensive, given the cost of big tech's access to their models. So it's really now showing us that a lot of things that we thought 2-3 years worth of work or investment is now available for us for free. We just now need to put in the work.
I do want to talk about costs, but you said that you're trying out different use cases. Give me an example.
We've primarily been building a model that's supposed to understand data protection and then grow it to be sort of a data protection officer sidekick, and also have the capabilities to work within a database and do all the work that a data protection officer could do. One other use case we've always wanted to try out is do this across all forms of compliance. And it just looked like it's a project where you say in 3-4 years we'll get there. But with the DeepSeek model, we're like, we could probably spend a year and have a very good prototype of this that's actually feasible to sit at a client, to be used by a client. So that's one use case we've looked at. Another use case that's been playing around in my mind is just mostly on research. I like the fact that the DeepSeek model, in terms of reasoning, it has the capability to show you all the steps it's taking. It's very transparent in that. So it allows you to fact check its reasoning to see how it's progressing. And so there are quite a few ideas usually that sit at the back of my mind, and you think, how will I ever validate or test these ideas? And it now gives us this opportunity.
When it comes to cost, DeepSeek does seem to be a game changer. How do you see that playing out?
I think you still need to throw a lot of dollars to the project, especially if you're developing a model from scratch. So what's happened previously with big tech, where they've had to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on GPUs, power, cooling, and training, I think that might be the same case with DeepSeek. I don't think you could achieve what they've achieved with $5.5 to $6 million. I think that was probably the last leg of their distillation process that may have cost that. But essentially, I think development costs will just keep going up. What we've seen that could bring them just a fraction down is the reinforcement training method that DeepSeek used. But where the cost really matters for me is on the use case.
Yeah.
And the use case level is where you get to introduce, the use cases where people use the models, whether for just prompting a question or via API. What DeepSeek have done is that they've made it a lot more cheaper with their mixture of experts technique, which means that whatever you type in to the model, doesn't have to go through too many parts of the neural network for you to get back a response. It's able to map out which areas of the neural network to focus on in order to give you a very accurate response, therefore reducing computational overheads that then obviously reduce the cost. And I think that's where a lot of focus might be in the future, because it allows them to capture a large segment of the market at such a low cost. So that's where I'd hope to see more innovation from big tech and other model providers, because that then encourages the adoption and use of AI, not just in the global north, but also in the global south, where predominantly we're small and medium enterprise-driven economies, especially in Africa, about 80%. So if inferencing becomes cheaper, then it makes it more accessible for more businesses and people.
So China alone has committed $130 billion to AI investment, and it said it wants to work with other countries, especially in the global south. And you were just talking about that. They want to work on science, on technology in particular. Now, Donald Trump has called for a $500 billion private sector fund in the US. I mean, what we're talking about, these are huge, huge figures. How is that?
Yeah.
How is that investment going to change the way that AI works and develops?
I think the investments from both sides are fundamentally going to shift how AI is developed. I think most of what the US is doing would be pushed towards power generation. I think China will focus on optimization of models. I think their market will build models that are a lot easier and cheaper and cost-effective for the global south. I think the US is more focused on building very powerful models that put them at the very top in terms of the capabilities of the model and what the model can achieve for them at a global level. So I guess that difference in their approaches could also be seen in the amount of money being invested. The US investing a lot more money. China not investing as much money, but I'm sure their models will be as competitive as US models.
Yeah. Well, we heard earlier in the show that AI is becoming a bit of a flashpoint in geopolitics. How are countries like Kenya and in Africa, how are you ensuring you don't get caught in that crossfire as the big hitters, the United States, China, the EU, battle for AI supremacy?
I think Kenya, we are fortunate that already we have a special envoy as an ambassador on technology to the rest of the world. And we've actually created, as a country, a diplomatic playbook on AI for all ambassadors and diplomats to use, because obviously artificial intelligence is going to be this huge change. It's going to bring this huge change across the world. And we want to ensure that if we are not developing the models and if we need to use the models, we also need to be part of the conversations, because geopolitically, we have seen quite a lot in terms of this sort of race to having the best models, where geopolitics has been introduced, and you're having trade restrictions, use of restrictions in terms of regions and locations. You're having, of course, censorship that's with different models depending on their country of origin or their political stance on different items. And I think it's important for Africa and the global south to get ahead of this and have some form of either a diplomatic playbook or having someone or some institution responsible for just supporting sort of these diplomatic engagements as these models are rolled out, because I think this year we'll see a lot of geopolitics around artificial intelligence.
Michael Michie, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You can watch every episode of The Agenda in full on CGTN Europe's YouTube channel. And for exclusive extra content from me, my guests and the rest of the team, don't forget to check out The Agenda Show on TikTok. Coming up on a future agenda, as Germany prepares to head to the polls, what does the upcoming election really mean for Europe's largest economy? But for now, from me, Juliet Mann, and from all the Agenda team here in London, goodbye.